Hey, Clayton, how come in Leviticus God makes rules about marrying your sister or cousin? In Genesis, Abraham and Sarah were half siblings, and Isaac and Jacob both married cousins. God seemed to be fine with those marriages. Also, wouldn't Adam and Eve's kids had to have married siblings? This is a good question. A few people actually asked it. It's clearly confusing if you're reading along in Leviticus and have been paying attention. So I think the passages that the questioners are asking about are in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, where it's basically a list of people that you're not allowed to sleep with. And most of the things on the list, most of the items are essentially close relatives. And it seems like half of the marriages in Genesis would violate one of these laws. Now, let me make a point of clarification before trying to explain this. Cousin marriage was actually not forbidden by Leviticus. If you actually kind of trace the relationships that are in there, at no point does it say first cousins can't marry each other. It says things like you can't sleep with your aunt or that sort of thing, but that the relationship of first cousin is not ruled out. Now, that seems very odd to us because most societies forbid cousin marriage. At least today they do. About 10% of marriages around the world are probably first cousin marriages. But in the ancient world, this was far more common. In fact, it was a very common arrangement because they lived in a tribal society. And so it was desirable to marry within your people group. And your people group probably was essentially a very extended family. And so it was very normal to marry someone that was as close as a first cousin. When you think about life in a small town where you don't move a whole lot, it's kind of difficult to find someone that you're not related to. And so that was the case in the ancient world. And it kept family inheritances and wealth and tribal alliances and that sort of thing within the group of people. And so it was fairly common for people to marry their cousins. And the Bible did not forbid this. If you want a historical perspective on it, I won't get into all the details. Cousin marriage was actually first outlawed by the church in the Middle Ages. It wasn't something that was obvious to people. And then it was actually extended later in the Middle Ages to include up to third cousins, which at first they only forbid just cousin marriage. And so it kind of moved up and up and up. There were lots of different kind of social and political reasons for this. But one of the results of this, believe it or not, was the elevation of the nuclear family. So we think of our families as mom, dad, and children, and that's it. Basically 2 generations, maybe 3 if you've got a parent living with you, an elderly parent living with you. But we think of families, when we just say that word, we imagine the nuclear family. In the ancient world, prior to those laws that were done by the church in the Middle Ages, people, if you said family, immediately thought of their extended family that probably all lived close together and collaborated together on life. And some of that was because marriages stayed within the family, so there was a closeness there. So this is kind of a historical thing, but back to the Bible, okay? Do the patriarchs break the Levitical laws, okay? Yes, they do, okay? So there are at least a couple of laws that they break. One of the laws in Leviticus says, do not have sexual relations with your sister, either your father's daughter or your mother's daughter, whether she was born in the same home or elsewhere. Abraham and Sarah break this law. Do not take your wife's sister as a rival wife. Okay, if you read the story of Jacob, he marries 2 sisters, Leah and Rachel, and it leads to all sorts of problems. And if you, depending on your view of creation, the questioner is right, Adam and Eve's kids, if Adam and Eve were the absolute literal first people on the planet, their children would have had to marry siblings. Now, if you take a different view of creation other than the 6-day creation view or the day-age view, if you hold an evolutionary creation view, you may believe that there were people beyond just Adam and Eve's immediate family that were there. So people didn't have to marry their siblings or that sort of thing. So there's some wiggle room and debate about all of that. But the question is, why would God in Leviticus seemingly change his stance on who you're allowed to marry? I think part of the confusion comes with this. When the Bible talks about something, it is reporting it. It is not always approving of it, okay? So just because God says this is what somebody did doesn't mean God is saying I'm cool with what that person did. And the characters in the stories, they are not set up to be heroes or moral examples in every single situation. There are times when what they do is meant to be something we imitate, but many times, it is simply describing the life that they actually lived, and some of the things they did were definitely not approved by God or things that we should imitate. The reason that we get their stories is because these are people who were used by God and experienced God's grace, and God used to move along his purposes. It wasn't because they were great, but because in his grace, God chose to use them. So Sometimes the Bible is just reporting, here's what they did, and not saying this is what they ought to have done or what you ought to do. And very often, examples in this area when it comes to marrying someone that you shouldn't have married, it's very clear from the circumstances, this was a dumb decision. This did not work out, okay? Jacob's life, because he married two sisters, was not happier because of that. Their family life was screwed up because of that. And so you can kind of read between the lines, like, if you're looking for, kind of happiness in your home and in your family, don't do this, right? So even though there's no commentary in Genesis about whether or not it was a good or bad thing, you can sort of see that that's the case. And in Leviticus, it's very clear that God says, don't do this, okay? And so we've got to remember, there are times when God is tolerating something and using people even when he doesn't approve of the things that they're doing. I think we see this in other situations like polygamy, okay? We've talked about on the podcast before, why did God tolerate polygamy or slavery? These are situations where God knew that these were fixtures in their culture, so they were going to exist. And even though in the long run, God did not want these things to be there, God worked with people in their culture where they are at and used those broken systems to move towards something better, okay? This is sort of like someone who says, look, I want to improve the environment, right? And so what do they want to do? They want to do things that pollute less. They want to not put as many, fumes into the air and emit as much carbon dioxide and so on. But in order to do those things, they've got to drive a car or fly in an airplane to go to some meeting to talk about those things. You tolerate the thing that you wish you didn't have to do in order to get to something better than that. There are times when God is doing that with human society. Now, I do want to say this about the laws in Leviticus 18 and 19, or 18 and 20. It's important to note that what they were doing is more than just talking about kind of protecting family genetics. Okay, that's how we think about it. We say, don't, sleep with a close relative because if you have a child, there could be genetic abnormalities or issues that come from that. That isn't primarily what the Bible is talking about here, although there may be some of that in God's mind for the reasons he gave those laws. But a lot of these laws are primarily about protecting the vulnerable people in an extended family household. So if you notice in Leviticus 18 and 20, the laws are directed to a male head of household. It's saying, you man who is kind of responsible for this family, here are the people within your family group that you are not allowed to touch. These are actually laws, believe it or not, about abuse. This is protecting vulnerable people in a home where if their head of household, if the man who's in charge of their family says, I want to do this, it's really easy for him to get away with it. This is laws about sexual abuse. It's God saying, I am not okay just because this man has power in this family that he gets to take whoever he wants in this extended family living situation and abuse them and use them and have them for their pleasure. And so this is actually God saying, no. This will not be tolerated in my people, in my kingdom. There's actually a sermon I did on Leviticus chapter 18, if you want to check it out. It's one of the wilder ones that I feel like I've ever done. This was back in March of 2017. The title of that sermon is Old Testament Sex Laws. Yeah, we're going there. So if you want to go on the ccclife.org website and look up that sermon, I go into greater depth about those Levitical sex laws. Thanks for listening. If you've got your own questions, email questions@BibleSavvy.com. Like and subscribe to catch our regular episodes every Monday on the Bible Savvy Podcast.